In this new chapter, we'll talk about our latest addition to Bonita BPM, the UI Designer. So we'll focus the entire chapter on creating forms with our new tooling. The first thing we'll do here is to create the case instantiation form. So we'll select the pool here, go into execution, and go into instantiation form. Here we have several options. We can call the UI Designer to create a form, or we can use an external URL to redirect to a form, or we can keep the legacy form from Bonita BPM version 6. In our case, we will use the new technology and we'll create a new form with the UI Designer. To do that, I can use the drop-down here and create a new form. This will open a browser window. The UI Designer is a new web-based tool to create forms for Bonita processes and pages for applications. This tool is based on AngularJS and Bootstrap. The way it works is pretty simple. You have components or widgets on the left side here, and you may drag and drop them onto the form placeholders. Then when you select elements, you have a detailed description of the element properties appearing on the right side. Below at the bottom of the screen, you'll have also a set of variables that you can declare at the form level to manipulate your data. As you may have noticed, we didn't start from a blank form. The UI Designer was able to generate for us a sample form based on the contract data. We will just have to rename this form first and call it, for example, expense report create form. And save it. And then we can play a bit with the different widgets and make it look a bit more appealing to the end user. So here I'm going to call it create expense report. I'm going to increase the priority of the title. I'm going to center it. This will look a bit more friendly. Now I will put the label in the same row as the cost. To do that, I'm going to modify the width of the label. Notice that the default width for all components is 12 columns. The column is actually a system coming from Bootstrap. This allows Bootstrap to render responsive forms. So a full row is actually 12 columns, and you can break down the number of columns each widget takes to reduce its width. Then, for example, I can take the cost there and put it on the side, and this will put both of the components on the same row. I can now remove the extra row here, and let's see how our form looks like now. We can save the form and we can preview it directly here. So here we have a summary, and we have, for example, no line right now, so we're going to add some. This is what our new form is going to look like. So let's work a bit on the initial data now to make it not empty. So I'll go back to the form here, and I will start to look at the form data. If I look at the form input variable here and I open it, we will see that it is defined as a type JSON, and it contains our contract structure, with the top object being the report contract composed of a summary and lines. The lines is actually an empty array, and this is why we had no lines when we previewed the form. So let's just create one line here. The line will be created as a just JSON object, so it's curly brackets, and we can type in attributes. The first attribute we'll have for the line is the label. We'll initialize that with an empty string, and we will add a second attribute with the cost, and we'll put it to null because we cannot use an empty string since this is a number. Now we can save our initial data here. We can save our form again, and we can preview it. Here we now have a first line that is registered for us, and we can continue to add more. Now that we have a form, let's put some placeholders in different widgets so that the user knows how to fill it. So I'm going to do that for summary. I'm going to put a text saying provide a summary for this expense report. Then for label, I'll say provide a label for this line. And for cost, I'll do the same, provide a cost for this line. Here we go. I will now save my form and preview it again, and here now our form looks nice. So we're almost done with this first form. The last thing we need to make sure is we send the right data to the process. So I'm going to check my submit button here, and I'm going to see what it does. Here we have this important property here. The action is actually to start a process. That's correct. And the data we send actually to the process when we click on this button is the form output data, which is defined here in this last line. Now, this is generated automatically from the contract, and this is not exactly what we want to do. Basically, what it is doing here is actually calling a JavaScript expression, a function, that creates a new object with one property called report contract that is actually taking data defined as the form input. Data references another data from the list of registered data on my process. So it's taking form input, which is the first data here, and it's taking the report contract attribute of this data. So it's just copying my form input as an output. So it's not very useful. What I can do is just directly send my form input data as is. I don't need to redo it again. So I'll just delete my form output. And here, instead of saying I'm sending form output, I'll just say I'll send form input. We're not modifying the input. We can just send it as it is. Now, also among the different properties we have on our submit button here, we have also the failed response value, which is important. Here, we don't assign anything here right now. The problem that will happen is that if we fill in an incomplete manner or form, we won't be able to see that there is an error. So for debugging purposes, I'm just going to do one thing. I'm going to create a text widget here. I'm going to create a variable called form submit error. Form submit error. I'll leave it as a string with an empty value. Now, when I click on my submit button, I will assign the failed response value to this particular variable here, form submit error. And in my paragraph here, my text here, I'll just write a quick expression, an Angular expression, so it's double curly brackets. And I'll say form submit error pipe JSON, just to write it in a nice JSON format. So what will happen is when I have an error, when I click on my submit button, I will capture back the error and I will display it here. I'll just put a bit of formatting to make it look nicer. I'll put some bold attribute here. This is some HTML to make it look a bit more friendly. Call it error and colon to show my error. Then what I will do also is to make sure this isn't displayed all the time. We don't want to see the error when there is no error. So I'll put some conditional display. In the hidden property here of my error widget here, I'm going to use a binding. So when I click on this particular symbol here, I will bind to some data instead of having a hard-coded value. And now I'm able to write an expression here to define whether or not I'm going to display my error field. So here I will write form submit error equal nulls. This means that when my form submit error is null, I don't want to show my paragraph here. So I can save, and I can already check that I'm not seeing the error line here. Now, the best check we can perform is actually do a live check. So let's just do that. Let's first try to run our process with our form. So I'll go back to the studio here, and I will do a run of my process. This will open, again, a browser window. And here we have our case start form here. So this is exactly the form I've been working on. And if I try to submit it without having my mandatory summary here, I'll have an error, which is displayed here. So what we'll try to do here is to send the data of the form to the engine. The engine got the data and matched it against the contract and saw that we are missing some elements here. So we could work a bit on simplifying the error message, but here we're just going to test it like as it is. So that's it for the first form. We can check now, we can add more data. Let's try to fill it something a bit more complete. So my first expense, and I don't know, drinks, like $5, and food 20. Okay, so now we have something that will match the contract. We can try again to submit, and here the form went out. So that means we satisfied the contract and we started the process. We are now having the first task here, review report, which is actually the first task in our process here. This is supposed to go to the manager of the person issuing out the request for expense. Now, since we're in a demo environment, the same user can perform all the tasks. So can perform the case start and can also look at the different tasks here. We're not going to do actor management in this particular demo. Now, we need to move further, and now we need to implement the second form for the review report task. So we'll go again to execution and to form here, UI designer, and we take a new form. The generated form here is very poor because we only have two elements in our contract. We have the isApproved attribute in our contract, and we have comments. Now, what we need to do to complete the form basically is to fetch the data that was entered during the case start form. So we'll need to add a display of the contract and the expense slides that were added. To do that, we have something that will help us. We have a new data registered automatically for us. This is the context. The context holds references to the data that is loaded in the process instance. So the best thing we can do now to explore this context is to do a test and to display it. If you want to know what is inside the contract, you can always test it by adding, for example, a paragraph here and taking this text and displaying it with a pipe, curly brackets, and context pipe JSON. This here will present you the data that is available in the context as a form of JSON. I will just rename my form here, and we'll do a test to show what this context holds. So I'm going to name my form expense report review form. Then I save my form. Okay, so let's do a run again. Going back to the studio, selecting my pool and clicking run. I will complete my first form. I'll just enter some basic data here, and I submit it. I can now try to execute my first task here, review report, and here we now see here the context being represented. The context holds one important thing here. It's an object that contains an attribute called ReportRef. This is a reference to the report BPM object. And here it is an object itself which contains different properties. So with that reference, we have the possibility to fetch our BPM object. What is interesting here is the link attribute. So if I call ReportRef.link, I will get the REST API URL I need to call to fetch my entire request object and the lines that are associated to it. So I'll do just that in the UI designer. I'll get back to UI designer, and I will add an extra data here in the variables. I will call it report, and I will use an external API, and the API will be based on the context. So I'm just going to inject it. I'm going to use context dot report ref as we saw, and then dot link. This gets me the link to fetch my business data from the Bonita BPM REST API. So I can save it, and now I'm going to be able to create the different widgets to represent my report, and I'm going to create a view that renders this. I will start by placing a title, just like the old form. Title is level 2, and I'll just center it here. I'll call this title review expense report, so that people know which step they are. Alright. Now I need to add my report data. So I'll first add the summary as a text. I'll put it read-only because we're not expected to change it at this time. I'll use as the data our report object here, and I'll use the attribute called summary. We also have some extra data that we can display. We can use the report date, so I'll just do that. I'll also put read-only, and I'll use the value report.creation date. Here there's a special trick. We need to represent the value with an angular filter to make sure it displays a nice date. So I'm just going to add the pipe date here, which is an expression that will transform my timestamp. So basically creation date is saved as a number, and pipe date will make sure it's displayed nicely due to the locale of the user viewing it. Now, next step is to retrieve my created by user. This user has been saved with user ID, so I need to call a REST API to fetch him. I'll name my variable called created by user because it's an entire user object. I'll use the external API. The API I want to call is called the identity API, and it's a user I want to fetch. Now I need to pass the user ID next. So the user ID is actually contained in my report.created by attributes. Okay, here. Now we have the user object. We now can add a widget to display it. So here I'll add another widget. I will call it reporter. I will put it as read-only. And here in the value, I will just do a combination of the first name and last name. So here I will not directly bind the user name here because I need two expressions to concatenate the first name and last name. So what I will do instead is I will just use the double curly brackets, call my created by user.firstName attribute. I will put a space in the middle, and I will add the second attribute, the last name, created by user.last name. This will concatenate both of these two attributes with a space in the middle and create a combined value. Alright, so we're done with the header of the report itself. Now we can add the lines just below. I will add a table widget just under it. I will also add a title also to indicate we are presenting the lines here. I'll lower it to level 4. Here I'll call it lines. One thing I also want to do for my presentation is maybe to put a little bit less space for the labels, so I'll reduce the width of the labels. I will only use 2 columns for the label width, so I'll just move all of them here. This will look a bit nicer. Now I get the lines, and then I have my table that I need to configure. For the table here I have some preset headers. I'm just going to simplify a bit. I just need 2 things. I need a label and I need a cost. So that's for the headers. Now for my data I need to fetch the lines of my report. So I'm going to use the binding for the content here to use my report.lines attribute. So this will iterate on the lines. For the column keys, if you remember when we entered the line we had 2 attributes. Well, that's pretty simple. It's just label and it's cost here. So this will display my my labels. I will also do an extra thing to make my cost appear in a more user-friendly way. I will add also a filter. That's a custom angular filter called currency. This will add the currencies, or dollar for example, in front of it. It will also put 2 decimals to the number. Let's take a look at our form. If I hit preview now, I'll have an idea about what my form will look like. Of course, we don't have the data loaded because we're not at runtime, but here we can already see that the line with the labels and cost is probably a bit too large here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce a bit the width it takes, but I want it centered. So I'm going to do a special trick here. I'm going to add a container just below the title here. I'm going to reduce its size to 2 columns, move up the table on the same row, and reduce my width of my table to be 8. So here I have an extra 2 spaces that are empty, and here the container is actually not shown at runtime. So if I save and I preview again, here we'll have our centered table, and this will probably look much better in the end. Alright, so now the next thing we want to do is maybe to change a bit the appearance of the bottom part, where the person who reviews the expense report is able to put his feedback. So we have the is approved checkbox and the comments text. I'm just going to remove all of that, and we're going to redo the bottom of the form now. So let's remove the is approved checkbox, let's remove the comments, and we remove the submit button also. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a form container here, and I'm going to place my widget in it. I'll use the text area for the comments, and for approving and rejecting, we'll use 2 different buttons here. I'm going to place the first one here. I'll put it only on half of the columns, and I'll place the second one next to it. Now I'm going to take this one, put it on the right side. I will name this one reject. I'll put its style in red with the style danger. The other one I'll call accept, and I'll put it in green with the style success. Now this here will be comments, and it will be required. Now I'm going to simplify a bit data handling. For us, we have 2 attributes, 2 variables that have been created, the form input and form output. In our case here, we want to do something simpler, so I will just delete both, and I will create only what I need. I will create one data called comments to store my comments, so it's a string. And then what I will need to do is to bind my widget to this comments variable here. And I need 2 expressions now, one for dealing with the reject and one for dealing with the accept. The expression will take the value of comments plus add a boolean flag for whether the request is accepted or rejected. So let's create the first one. We'll call it onReject. OnReject will be of type JavaScript expression, and we need to return an object, and the object will have a first attribute called comments. For the comments, we're just going to retrieve the value of our data with the comments here. And for the second attribute, this is the is approved, we'll use a hard-coded value because we're going to bind this to the rejected button, so this will always be false. I'm going to copy paste this block here, and I'm going to create also the onAccept variable with the same type of thing. OnAccept, also a JavaScript expression, and copy pasting value here, and I'm going to hardcode the is approved to true in this case. Now the next step is to bind the buttons to return onAccept or onReject when we click on them. So when you select the button, we can go on data sent on click, and I can bind my expression here on reject for reject button, and for accept I can bind the onAccept here. I also need to make sure I return to the right URL, so here we're just going to reject to /Bonita, and I'll do the same thing for the reject button. There. We will also have to handle the errors, so we'll have a variable called form submit error of type string here that we can bind to the failed response value. Same thing for the reject also, we need to bind the same data here. And we can display it just below with a paragraph here. So I'll put it at the bottom of the form. Here, I'll use the same trick as I have in the case start form. Form submit error pipe JSON to present it. And yeah, I'll just add a label within in bold to indicate that this is an error. I will hide the error when it's not needed. So I'll do form submit error equal null. This will hide the error when there's no error. And lastly, I'll just remove also this block here, the whole row we had to show the context. Forgot to add it before. Now let's save that, and we're going to try to run our process to test this particular form. So I'm going to go in the studio. I'm going to click on run. This will deploy my process. Switch to the form here, and I'm just going to type in summary, label L1, my cost, I don't know, 3, and I'll add a second line. This will be L2 and 3, 4, 5, 6. And I submit my form. Here I move to the review report task here, and I should be looking at my form now. See that the date was properly formatted, the reporter was fetched correctly, my lines are well displayed, especially the money is correctly displayed in the right currency, and I can provide a comment to say whether or not I have accepted it. Okay. And when I type, notice that the validation here of the form transforms my buttons. I can now click on them. I can accept, and here I'm done, my process is finished. Okay, so we're now going to work on the rejected form here, because when we disapprove the expense report, we'll go back to the update report task here. So we need to create the form for this one now. So I'm going to select it, go into execution, go into forms, and I'm going to create a new form. There we go. This has opened for me the UI designer page of the form, and I'm now going to work on this particular form here. I'm going to rename my form expense report update form, saving it. Now I'm going to try to do something that matches the layout of the case start form. So I'll just put the line label and line cost on the same row here. And then we need to fetch our initial data. If we look at what was automatically generated, we have form input, which is just blank data. So we're not going to go with this. We're going to fetch our data using the context again. So I'm going to create a new variable. I'll call it report. I'm going to use the API. Here I will use the same technique as I had in the previous form. So I'm going to use the context variable here. Again, calling the report reference, ReportRef, and getting the link attribute of this report. Okay, so this fetches my object. Now I just need to make sure I remap my different forms to the right data. So here for the summary, I'm going to take the report.summary, and for the lines, I'm going to take report.lines. Okay, and here I can make sure the item label and item cost are already mapped. I don't have anything to do. These are automatically mapped to the line. I now need to make sure my add and remove buttons are working with the right lines. So instead of this, I'll do report.lines, and for removing also report.lines. Next, I'm going to change the title to make it look like the other ones, centered and level 2. And I'm going to rename it expense update expense report. There we go. Now I need to make sure I have the proper error handling, so I'll create a variable form submit error as we did previously. This will be a type string. I'll make sure that when we submit our form, we bind the error on form submit error. I will add a paragraph to display the error if needed, just at the bottom of the form. I'll use the same text as I had before with bold caption, air column, bold caption, and with my error displayed. So that's form submit error as JSON. I will not show the error if there's no error, of course. So if form error equals nulls, I'm gonna hide it. I need also to make sure I show the comments of the approvers. So I'm just gonna add one extra text area here. I will put the label on top and I will call it approvers comments. Okay, this will be read-only, and I will take as a value the report.approver commands. This will indicate the data entered in the previous form. Before I can preview my form, I need to fix one last thing. When I created the form, I had this automatically generated data called form input, and my form output relies on it. So I need to fix this. Now, instead of using this data form input report contract, I can directly work on my data called report, because it already contains the element I need to send. If I can compare it with my studio, if I go into the update report task and I look at my contract, it will match exactly what I have in my form. The summary, the lies with the label, and the cost. So this is perfect. I can leave it as it is here. I can now save my page, and let's try to run the process. So I go back to the studio, I run it. Now I can provide a summary, so I'll call it just summary. I'll add a first line with label L1 and a cost of 1. I'll add a second line, L2, with a cost of 2. This will start my process now. Here I can review what I have entered, so everything is still fine. I will say this is not okay, and I will reject. Now we're back to the update report task here. And here in terms of process, we did the case start form, we reviewed it, we said it's not okay, we're back to update report. Now I will do that so I can see my comments here. It worked. I have my summary, so I'll say new summary, for example, and I will remove a line and add a new one. So here I'll add a line L3 so that we can see the difference, and with a cost of 3. Then I will submit my form here, and we're back to the review report task. We have performed the loop in the process, and we can see that the lines are updated, the summary is updated, everything went fine. We can say now, this time, everything is okay, thank you, and we're done. So we have completed the process implementation. We were able to demonstrate the entire loop and go throughout all the forms. Of course, you can always work on a nicer form, and you can always fine-tune what is expected and enrich the data. But here we went through the basics for form modeling. So thank you for having followed this chapter, and we'll see you soon.